success, failure, and everything in between. Raising the business game together. Learn from leaders, innovators, and misfits on how to get made in China.
Sitting in the private dining room at Brad Turley's Hai Bai Goga, overlooking Shanghai, I had another restaurateur, Bob Boyce, behind the Made in China mic. So many people had been buzzing about Bob's company evolution. Anyone who spoke about him seemed to have a sincere respect for the man. I first met Bob a few years ago at a Young Presidents Organization dinner, when I brought author of Turn the Ship Around, David Marquet, to China to speak at Huawei and Tsinghua University. Bob was soft-spoken and humble from my first impression, and his perspective on the needs of Chinese employees really resonated with me. I knew he was connected to the people. Similar to Dominic Johnson Hill in episode 1, Bob believed and trusted. He gave in to his local teams, and I'm sure they did the same to him. Early in his company, he took responsibility for the weaknesses as a direct reflection of his own leadership. He stayed positive, always knew he was going to win, and schooled himself to be better.
My relationship with China goes way back. So I've been here 21 years, and I came here right out of university. I never really worked professionally back in the U.S. And so really I feel like I kind of grew up in China, or grew up with China. So I think my story is probably a little bit more unique than most people my age who are here.
30, right?
Yeah, something like that. 30 something. In that, I sort of came of age in China as China was coming of age, and so my story and my journey is one that just really parallels that of what's happened here. And so when I look at things, my perspective is one that's it's not exclusively American, and it's not, it's definitely not Chinese. It's a bit of a hybrid of someone who's grown up and been a part of what's happened here, this tremendous change, but with the context of being, born and educated in the U.S. So I think people who came here around that time, the early 90s, have had a very unique perspective on China and what's happened here.
So can you give me an example of biggest failure that you've learned from, and the biggest success you think that you learned from, and how did it happen?
Well, I think probably my personal biggest failure over the last 10 years or 15 years of building the business is we had a venture in Macau that just went south, and we ended up closing and losing a stack of money there. So I got caught up in the 2006, 2007, the whole fever that was Macau back then. We were offered a location in the Venetian. It was a great location, very hard to say no to. It was very easy to raise money for. It was the first time I'd ever raised money for a project. Everything else I've sort of coggled together and made work from my own resources or immediate resources. I built the business with very little debt and basically out of cash flow over the years. So this was the first time I went and raised money for a project, and on paper it looked amazing. It was, Vegas of Asia. They were even marketing it that way. And I was able to be part of the process of building the Venetian. I was in the building all the time when it was being built. Part of the hype leading up to it, part of the hype opening. We sunk a very large amount of money into the fit out and the infrastructure to get something open there. Had it open, the first year was really quite good, and it was ramping up nicely. And then in 2008, the financial crisis hit, and everything just stopped. And so what looked like a very bright future turned into a very dismal one. And then, the next 3 years were spent sort of battling to stay open, battling for customers, for visibility. The nature of the market changed very dramatically. there. It went from being a business that was partially driven by events and the mice business, meetings, incentives, something and something. Mice, basically the
expo business,
yeah. And that dried up completely. The government became very difficult to work with. It became really hard to get labor, their quota for working in Macau. And basically 4 years after we had opened, we ended up closing and pulling out of Macau completely.
Why do you think the government was hard after?
To my knowledge, it still is quite difficult to get labor there. They had a lot of pressure from local labor groups who were concerned about losing their jobs. But, at the time, they had under 2% unemployment, but were still making it very difficult to bring in foreign workers. So it's a mystery. To me, to this day, Macau is a complete mystery. I don't understand how it works, and at this point I really don't want to understand.
Yeah.
We're done there. So it was a big lesson on so many different levels, and one was know your playing field. And I think when we went down there, we really didn't know the playing field. We made a bunch of assumptions that it was going to be somewhere in between China and the US, because they were very American centric in the Venetian. But the Macau operating environment is something that is unique to Macau. I haven't really seen it anywhere else in Asia, and the learning curve was steep, and in the end it didn't work out. So that was probably be my biggest failure to date in Asia. I'm sure there'll be a few more coming, but that was a big one.
So I heard this a lot about Macau as well, and strangely enough, my one of my close friends, her little brother went to Northwestern. One of his best friend's dad was head of the Venetian, and so he went to Macau for a year and played at every table and every casino to do research for the Venetian. So I think it's kind of interesting. What's this unique environment about Macau that you're talking about? Like, why isn't it like?
Well, it's a city state that, is built around gambling. The primary industry is gambling and hotels, but mainly gambling. And so, and the government has very tight regulations, regarding who can be a dealer and who cannot. And so you have to be a Macau resident to be a dealer. Mm-hmm. And a dealer right out of, high school makes really good money, way more than somebody out of university. So there's very little incentive for people to go and get more further education. So you have there's this population with that makes quite good income, but they're operating on pretty limited education levels, which is fine if you have a segment of the population that's that way. But it it really
they're all like that.
Seemed that the entire population was headed that way, if not that way. I mean, sure. I don't mean to ever say that there are no educated people in Macau. Right. There certainly are, but that was definitely a trend. The environment was encouraging people to not go for further education, and I think that reflects on society there.
Sure,
is my personal opinion.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. What about the huge success?
The huge success, it's a combination of a lot of things, but I think what I'm most proud of my time in China is the team that we've built in the company. When I started, we had 25 people. Those kids were young. They were like 18 to 25, just literally off the train from the countryside. Most of our people were. And now we have 1,500 plus people. And it's growing every day. A lot of the folks that have been with me for over 10 years, there's some that have been with me 15 or 14, almost 15 years, are now just incredible business people. They're great managers and they're real leaders in the company. And those that have left the company have gone on to do, all sorts of different things. So I'm really, really proud of the team that we've built, company culture that we've built, and the people that we've influenced over all of those years. I think that's by far my biggest success.
So I guess, the trust and leadership questions are maybe going to kind of lead into this. Mm-hmm. But maybe tell me, how did you create that team? How did you grow these people?
Well, I think it goes back to when, about a year and a half after we opened the first restaurant. I opened with a business partner, Kathleen Lau. And
is she Chinese?
She is Chinese American.
Okay, so
Yeah.
also not a foreign, two foreigners.
Foreigner,
Okay.
yeah. And talking about trust, that the original business was actually in her cousin's name. So her cousin is Shanghainese, and so my original business wasn't even in my name, and I had no right to it actually. So when you talk about trust, in those days, there was no choice. I had to trust in this person, and in the end, it worked out fine. But for a lot of people who were in that situation, it didn't. So trust has always been an element. There's always been an element of trust for me building the business here. But back to sort of the early days. So Kathleen and I had opened the second restaurant, which was Cab in Xintiandi. And then about a month after we opened, she came to me and she just had enough. It was a very, very stressful period of time. And cash was short and we weren't sure if the business was going to make it or not. And so she just had enough and wanted out of the business. So we worked out a deal and I ended up buying her out of the original business. And then I found myself in a situation where I was sort of overnight the patriarch of the family, for better or for worse. Right. Yeah. And so I was the father, the older brother, the disciplinarian, the cheerleader, all of that kind of stuff, just sort of overnight. And I honestly wasn't ready for that in any way. And as a result, we had, I don't know, it was probably at least 100% turnover every 6 months. We just cranking through people. That's such a stressful thing to happen to a business. There's no way, you can build a sustainable business on that kind of turnover. So I had a number of very clear conversations, maybe not so clear, but at least sort of brutal conversations with myself about what was going on. And, when it all came down to the problem in our company and in our system, was me. It was me and the way I was leading or not leading. And so that sort of started a journey for me of self-discovery and of reflection and action on how I was as a leader of this organization. At the time I looked at our people and our company and sort of what they needed. They were all very young. It was the early days, so they were 19 to 23, 24. Most of them were from the countryside or from the provinces. Most of them were away from home. Almost all of their parents had no idea what kind of world these kids were living in. Their parents grew up in the Cultural Revolution and
Right.
and were not in big cities, or if they were in big cities, they weren't in big cities like Shanghai. So a lot of these kids were just rudderless, and they were looking for something in their lives, something being opportunity and a chance and a place to belong as well. And so it's sort of a combination of a lot of things. But what I came up with were basically 5 sort of critical elements for a young person at the time. And it really hasn't changed over the years, and it's still sort of central to the way we think as a business. But the first one is clarity. They needed to feel, or they needed to understand where they stood in the company, clear contracts, clear metrics for performance. They needed to know where they stood. And before the general norm of the time was to keep contracts sort of vague and not clear so that you could manipulate people. We clarified all of our contracts. We made it very clear where people stood. And then, over the years, we've developed quite a clear tracking, evaluation, metrics for people. And, that has been a long-term journey, but, it started back then. The other one, is opportunity. They were young people, and young people everywhere in the world need opportunity, and they need to feel like they're going somewhere. And, and that's certainly true in China, and it's true everywhere else I've been. So, by growing the business, there's a clear pathway to opportunity for our people. And, someone who started with us as a waiter could very easily within 3 to 4 years become a manager of their own restaurant, and pull down really pretty serious salaries. So we created a sense of opportunity. Also, the next one was a sense of belonging. They really needed and need to feel like they belong to something. And so the sense of company culture and of belonging to something that's more than just a job became really important to the company and to our people and to me personally. So the next one is discipline. You can't do anything without discipline. People need to know that there are rules, and the rules need to be enforced, and there are repercussions for not following the rules. And if you give people clarity, then it makes it easier for them to follow
the rules, right?
And and we've always had a few rule breakers, and sometimes that's not a bad thing if it's if it's in the right place. So then the last component is pay. You have to pay people a fair salary. And, we've never paid at the absolute top of the market, but we've certainly not ever paid at the bottom. So we always like to be, 75 to 80% of the top. And, we need our people to be paid fairly, and they need to believe that they're paid fairly. And I think that that's part of the formula. So in the end, I didn't have a better name for it. I still don't have a better name for it, but we just called it family style management. And so over the course of many years, I changed. I had to change pretty quickly back then because I was losing the business.
Right.
And we were growing. So, it started with a shock to the system and then really germinated as from a conversation, a frank conversation that I had with myself. And
so when you said the problem was you, what were those problems? Like how did you identify that? And what were you doing wrong?
I guess I was managing from 40,000 feet. I wasn't understanding the problems. I would come in, see something wrong, get emotional about it, freak out, talk to somebody about fixing it, and then leave. And that's no way to manage anywhere, but it's definitely no way to manage in China because it's all about the details. So I became way more focused on solutions and how to really truly dig into a problem, dissect it, go all the way back, and then fix it from the root cause. That is an incredibly energy intensive process, especially because we had to do it for almost everything. And our folks had never eaten in a Western restaurant before, maybe McDonald's, but that was about it. So they didn't even know, a lot of them had never eaten with a knife and fork. So the concept of Western food, Western service, Western drink, all of it was completely foreign to them. So we had to train from ground zero all the way through. And, and again, that was an energy intense process. And one, that didn't necessarily play to my strengths. My strengths were not in the details. So I had to force myself to go there.
Do you think that some of the way, when you said that you weren't ready, when you said that the way that you acted, you kind of gave some examples. Where do you think that came from? Like you managed from too high, you get pissed and you leave. A complete lack of experience. I mean, honestly, there's, I'd never been the owner of a business. I'd been in the restaurant business as a waiter before, but I'd almost never been in management of a restaurant before. Mm-hmm. I just was completely inexperienced and unused to being in charge. And so, and I think at the time I didn't even understand that I was a leader. I mean, I didn't even understand that I had that in me. Sure.
Fortunately I found it in me.
Otherwise,
otherwise I don't think we'd be talking right here, right now. But what I found over just by being thrown into it is that leadership is something that I enjoy and react to positive way. I embrace leadership now, but at the time, I just didn't know what I didn't know.
It's just trouble too, right? It's just all this extra work.
The trouble and the work didn't bother me because it was my business. So right. Work has never bothered me. It's never really, and particularly back then, it wasn't work to me. It was my business and
you had to do it.
It was survival. I didn't even think of it in terms of survival. I just never believed that my business wouldn't survive or wouldn't thrive. I never believed that. And if you talk to the folks, there's a few folks, still in Shanghai that were there in the early days, when I was, bartending and running plates and, apologizing for whatever. But also greeting people and getting to know people and all that kind of stuff. You know, they'll probably tell you that I had a unnatural optimism towards the business, whereas a lot of people thought, "What are you doing?" I just never believed that it would fail.
Wow. You talked about training. I would like, what type of training are the things that how did you focus on training education? I think it must be two questions. Because one, it seems to me that as a newbie to a business and really having this realization, you needed to get learned really quick. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, when you recognize that your people didn't know, like, were basically doing alien things to them, you had to educate them.
Yeah.
So tell me kind of about educating them and educating you.
Well, it started with my own education. And the thing about China back then, there was no internet. And there was definitely no way to get extra, to brush up on an accounting course or to really have access to any sort of, learning module or even a seminar. There wasn't anything like that back then. So, I would go to Hong Kong or back home, and load up on textbooks, hotel and restaurant management 101 and business books and management books and anything I could find, recipe books, anything that I could find I could, glean some knowledge from. Uh-huh. And yeah, my bags used to be full of books, not anything else. Right. When I came back to China. So that was the early day for me. The early days for me were regarding education were just sort of self-educating myself. And also I've always had a really strong network of friends, and mentors who were gracious with their time and their energy and were really happy to help me, understand,
see what you didn't see.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. So that was a part of early on, my early on education.
What were some of the books that, are still Bibles to you or that really made a big difference for you? And then maybe tell me a little bit about some of those mentors.
A couple of books that stand out just immediately, aside from the Hotel and Restaurant Management 101, which was very useful. Textbooks are actually a great source of information if you don't have anything else. But I read Good to Great and by Jim Collins and just really, all of it resonated with me. And I think most people who are building businesses or in business probably have the same reaction to that book. It really is, one of the great
pillars, right?
Yeah, books on business there are. And then Mastering the Rockefeller Habits by Vern Harnish. That book is what and the thinking behind it is what really helped me transition my business into something that was the sort of small and struggling to a growth business. And the principles are really, there are a lot of the same principles as Good to Great, but it's, hire good people, build rhythms around everything, measure everything you can measure. When we started to put those practices and principles into place in the business, it became way easier to grow the business. And my stress level has always been high with the business, but reduced just a little bit after putting in meeting rhythms and just sort of having a clear one-page strategic plan so that everybody knew where we were going.
It created that clarity that you talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a big part of the business growth. And the other part of my education process was Young Entrepreneurs Organization, YEO. It's now called EO, but at the time it was YEO. I all of a sudden was in this group of 15,000 other entrepreneurs worldwide, and I found that just incredibly empowering. And also,
you weren't alone.
Yeah, I was not alone. And there's so much power in sharing. When you get a group of entrepreneurs together in the same room and you start bouncing ideas off of each other, it really is quite a powerful thing. And then later, after EO, I joined YPO, Young Presidents Organization, which is a network of 20,000 other CEOs and business leaders. And that's been also an incredibly powerful, motivating factor and educating factor in my life. So this now, because I have access to so much great learning, I try to go on a week-long learning program every year. And last year I did Stanford. The year before I did Harvard, just for a week, and then learned with other. It's a YPO sponsored program, so we learned with other business leaders. So that exposure and that type of learning is what really works the best for me. The idea of going back and doing a full year or 2-year MBA just does not appeal to me in any way. Ongoing education is just critical.
Absolutely.
And it's something that I'm always looking for.
Who are your big mentors? Who are the people that either made a big impact or continue to make a big impact with you?
You know, my mentors are other business leaders. They're people in the community. The first one is a guy named Dale Ward, who's a banker in Guangzhou, and he was kind of someone that took me under my wing when I was under his wing when I was working for a moving company and a little bit clueless on just about everything. So he kind of took me under his wing and really was generous with his time and helped me formulate my early ideas about how to be professional and how to present myself in a professional world, and then also how to manage people and how to start to build a team and how to think about problems and problem solving. So, to this day, he's a good friend and someone I call quite often. Another person is a person who's, a guy named Eric Swizzler, who's, built and runs a very large, pharmaceutical distribution company. And, he's been a friend for, 15 years since the beginning of the business, and just someone that I've always gone to for advice and to bounce ideas off of and commiserate sometimes. He's a longtime China guy too. So those are the two top ones. And then, there have been countless friends and people through YPO and through EO as well that have been instrumental. I just think you can't personally develop and you can't build something without a great group of people around you. I guess it's that takes a village kind of mentality. The other thing I would say, in my company, my executive chef, Chef Ling, has been with me for 15 years, and he's been somebody that I have always considered critical to the business, and his opinions and his ideas I've always valued, and honestly, without him, we wouldn't have the business that we have today.
What was his background when you hired him?
He started when he was 14 in the Portman, when it was the Shangri-La back then, under a French chef. The guy just said, "You're hired, now wash dishes," and then worked his way up. And when he came to work with us, he was at Longbai, the Longbai Hotel, working under a German chef. Lars, the German chef, had said, it's time for you to go out and start learning more. So
really?
Gave him permission to go out and start stretching himself. So that's where when he came on board with us, and then there's just been part of our growth process, part of my growth process all along.
So how's your what I think it's interesting, maybe, is there a unique relationship between you and him as one of your top, your Chinese generals? Is he kind of like...
Yeah, he's like my brother. I mean, honestly, he's like family to me. So, and I think, we have that. We just have a very close relationship. So,
would he have been one of the closest Chinese relationships you've had, local relationship you had, or? Probably,
yeah. Yeah, I have a number of those relationships within my company because,
with you forever.
Well, yeah. And we're 90, I guess we've taken on some foreigners recently, but we've always been 95 to 98% Chinese operated and run. So the people who have built the business with me are close to me. Yeah.
Well, what do you think you've learned from your local people?
So many lessons.
Yeah, but I'm the experience of, I think maybe what I'm trying to get is I feel like a lot of people don't feel or haven't learned how to tap into that. And I think that's one of those X factors of success or not, is really the role of those local people.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong.
At the end of the day, we're in China and we're building the business in China with Chinese people in the business and for Chinese people as consumers. So
you've had to rely on that.
Well, yeah, I don't know why you wouldn't.
Right.
I just don't. To me, I just don't understand why. If you're going to be here, we're here. I'm here. I made the decision to build my business here. They're my people. It's our company.
No brainer.
And so I don't really. It goes back to having grown up here. This is my home, it's my business home, and it's the place I've called home for 20 years. So there's no way I could have built the business without viewing my local team as integral to my life and to the business. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And so, I guess that goes back to the training question. I needed these people to step up. And so I put a lot of responsibility and probably pressure on them from an early stage. Some made it, some didn't. And then tried to augment, the pressure I was putting on them with training and development so that they had as many of the skills as they could get and as much training as they could get to do the job that I needed them to do.
You were saying back then there wasn't a lot of resources. You had to do all the training, create all the training yourself?
Yeah, well, that would have been a disaster, actually. I actually ended up hiring somebody from a hotel to do that because if I had to do it, it would have taken forever. And I always ensured that there were resources for training. And training has always been crucial to our success because our people are everything, and their performance every day is the difference between whether you as a customer has a great experience or a bad experience. And so it's just insane to me that somebody wouldn't consider training just paramount in their business. And we have always considered it critical.
So how much time,
business.
maybe, and money do you allocate to training, and how has that kind of evolved?
In the early days, I don't even know how I would quantify it, but it was a lot of time. It was a lot of time, and it was a lot of money. And a lot of the early days, the training was just, repeat after me or go back and do it again, or, let's try that again. And then we started to develop training modules, and we started to develop standard operating procedures. And we've spent huge amounts of time and energy and money on standard operating procedures, and then on training modules that fit into those standard operating procedures. It hasn't always worked.
Sure.
And we've probably burned through more resources than I would have liked over the years doing the wrong thing. But at the end of the day, it's always been crucial to our business. So our people have to understand how to operate on a daily basis, and then they have to be trained on how to do it.
It's like David Marquet stuff, right? The clarity of what are you trying to achieve?
Yeah.
And then how do I get there?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And then step by step, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, repeat step 1, step 2, step 3. It's really boring stuff, but it's the nuts and bolts of how we deliver a great experience to you, the customer. Right. Because without it, be sending these kids out onto the floor without proper training, without a proper background in how food and beverage actually works, how Western food and beverage actually works. And, that just doesn't work. Sure. You got to have clear training.
You think time-wise, nowadays, now that you're already mature and budgets for that, do you think it's kind of like maybe like 1/5 of the time, 1/10 of the time?
Yeah, it's probably a fifth of the time.
I think one day a week.
We actually have, we brought on a large corporate partner about 2 years ago called Amrest. One of the reasons we brought them on as a partner is because they have a huge amount of experience in scaling a business, and their training programs are really robust and really slick. So we've spent a lot of time adapting a lot of their processes into our own and making them work in the Chinese context.
Right. Adapting them.
That's been a big part of what we've been doing the last couple of years. I think I can safely say we have training programs that are
phenomenal.
Pretty awesome. Yeah.
That's great. On the business side, there's a lot of accountability. Like I think you said, as a leader, to your people, you have mentors, you have peers. What about personal accountability in your own life and what you want, not just business stuff? How do you stay accountable? Who keeps you accountable?
I've always sort of gone my own direction. So I'm the one that keeps me accountable for my own sort of behavior and keeping my own goals. I actually don't react very well to somebody else keeping me accountable. I'm way better at holding myself accountable than having somebody else hold. That's why I actually am not a very good employee. I'm kind of unemployable, I think.
Really?
Just because I don't like other people telling me what to do.
Uh-huh.
I'll tell myself what to do and hold myself accountable. And so that's how I view things. And I've always had a very clear picture of where I want to go in my head. So, I hold myself to that picture. I've had a partner for the last 11 years who has also been sort of a rock in my life as we're building, this business. And as things have gotten sort of ebbed and flow in terms of stress levels, he's always been a rock in life. And I do have to say that he can hold me accountable more than most, actually.
That's great.
Yeah.
What about loneliness? I think you were here early. There weren't a lot of people that were foreign. And I think a lot of people find no matter how many friends people have to some degree, I also think there's a lot of loneliness in entrepreneuring, in business, and in China. Do you have any lonely? Some people have said, no, I don't ever feel lonely. And some people feel like, yeah, it can be really lonely.
Yeah, I think early on when I first started into leadership, when I first took over the business, I thought, holy crap, I don't know who to talk to about this and the stuff that was happening to me at the time. And then I got involved with EO, which was a group of peers, and found that there were so many other people who were going through the same things, maybe different businesses, but the same issues. And so it was a great learning platform for me. And also, to be able to be able to share an experience or hear an experience from somebody who's has been or is going through, that similar stuff. And there is a very large laundry list of things to go through, particularly when you're building a business anywhere in the world, but when you're building one here, there's some. That's
where you're able to find people who knew the context, or dealing with the same context.
Yeah. And so I found that valuable. I think the lonely part about the last probably 20 years is, I'm building a business in a country that's not my own country. And it doesn't matter what I do as an individual in China. I'm still a foreigner, and there's no way that will ever change. And so I think I don't think it's a loneliness. I don't feel lonely about it, but I definitely feel disconnected at times with the community, the greater community here. Because at the end of the day, I'm a foreigner.
Yeah, you're not Chinese,
and I pay a lot of tax. I've employed a lot of people. I've influenced a lot of people's lives here, but I'm still a foreigner in anyone on the street's eyes. So I think that's something that is it's not really hard to deal with, but it's probably always in the back of my head. Yeah.
I think. What would you like to hear? Or is there anything now? What keeps you up at night? What, either professionally or personally, because you're at this. You've had a great amount of success, but you're still going, right? There's still so much more you want to do to some degree.
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, for sure. And, and with the business, I've handed over the business, the operational part of the business to our group president, Corley Danks, who just does a spectacular job of running the company. So my role is it's about advising and about brand stuff and talking about where and how the business is going. So I have more time to think about where we're going and where I'm going, which is a good thing, I guess. I would say the stuff that keeps me up at night is really the stuff that you can't control. So bird flu or when we first had our first natural disaster was SARS in 2003, where we just literally lost 80% of our business overnight, and it didn't come back for 4 or 5 months. So, when you go from being, having a really great looking year to having a hard time paying your suppliers, and making payroll, then that's a stressful situation. So those unforeseen, natural phenomenons or black swan events, like the financial crisis was incredibly stressful. for everybody, and not just us. So those are the kind of things that I guess keep me up a little bit. Just in, it's the stuff you can't control that worry me. And then also, I always worry about our people. As we grow the business, we'll add 15 restaurants this year. How are we going to fill all those restaurants with people who have a vested interest in making sure that you have a great experience? So that, that's something that we as a company are always concerned about. Yeah. But we're also, we temper that worry and concern with a very clear plan of action for how we're going to make sure that, that if you're in Chongqing, you're going to have the same great experiences in Beijing or Shanghai. Yeah.
What would you like to hear from others?
I always love to hear people's stories, the way they've gotten to where they're at, how they've built what they have, whether it's their business or their career or whatever they're doing. I think the journey is so interesting, particularly in this neck of the woods. It's such an interesting place to have lived this last number of years. So I never get tired of hearing people's stories, particularly on China and on Asia in general, because it's just been such a tremendously interesting period of time.
Sure.
So I'm all about listening to people's stories. The good, bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, good. And then last, you heard the question, if it was the last, if the asteroids were headed for you, what are you going to tell your staff? What are you going to tell the people about you, or what's the kind of thing you want to leave this planet with that people hopefully will take on into their own lives?
I think it's a very broad question, but I think at the end of the day, if you're going to err on the side of generosity. That's how I try to live going forward. Is if I'm going to make a mistake, I'd rather it be a more generous mistake than a less one. Yeah.
Bob Boyce cares about people. Maybe that's who he always was, or maybe that's just what being made in China did to him. You can find all kinds of people who've achieved financial success in China, but the success I find most valuable is someone who's earned the trust and loyalty of the people. Bob's Chinese head chef of many years is his brother and part of his family, just like the rest of his team, and he takes that and owns that responsibility completely. There are those who reach success by pushing their teams, and others that are carried on those very same shoulders. Bob works with his staff, not at them. He spends his time and his money making them better for themselves, and as they improve personally, they improve professionally. Proud to know Bob Boyce and eat Bob's Burgers from Beijing to Baotou. Thanks for getting made with us at High, in the High, on the Made in China podcast. Keep the feedback coming. Keep us honest. And if you like what you're hearing, please keep sharing.
You've been listening to Made in China, a podcast that raises the business game in China. We need your help. Tell us what you want and share the stories that matter. Check the show notes and more information about the show at getmadeinchina.com. That's getmadeinchina.com.